My name is Paul Watson, the founder of the Sea Shepherd Conservation Society, and I'd like to clarify some of the confusion and misunderstandings about the recent announcement by Japan that they're going to change their tactics. The media has been reporting that they're going to resume commercial whaling. Well, the fact is that they never stopped commercial whaling. They've been doing it since the moratorium on commercial whaling was established back in 1987. And so simply what they're doing is dropping the research pretense that they've been doing all this time. And this is good news, and I'll tell you why it's good news. First of all, it means they're going to have to withdraw from the Southern Ocean Whale Sanctuary, and that is something that we have been working on for, well, since 1987, and our campaigns that began in 2002 down to the Southern Ocean. We spent a lot of effort, a lot of time, and it was a dangerous task to go down and confront them, and it ended up costing them an extremely amount of money. We saved over 6,000 whales. We cut down their quotas every year down to sometimes 30%, one year down to only 10%. And it was a very expensive thing for them. But why is Japan making this decision? Well, in 2014, the International Court of Justice ruled that their whaling was illegal under the pretense of research, that it was in fact commercial whaling. And this year at the International Whaling Commission, it became quite evident to the Japanese that they will not ever get permission from the International Whaling Commission to resume, commercial whaling. Commercial whaling remains illegal. The good news about all this is that the Southern Hemisphere, for the first time in history, will be free of whalers. No whaling in the Southern Hemisphere, not just the Southern Ocean Whale Sanctuary, but the fact is that now with Japan no longer involved in the International Whaling Commission, the International Whaling Commission will be able to establish the South Atlantic Whale Sanctuary, something that it's been trying to do for decades. That's all good news. I can't think of anything better than the fact that we have no whaling for the first time in history in the Southern Hemisphere. The Japanese have retreated to their own shores, just like Iceland and Norway, to kill whales in their waters. They have been doing that all along, so that's nothing new, nothing's changed there. But what has changed is the way whaling is viewed in Japan. They had to make this decision for financial reasons. One of the reasons being is that the Nissan Maru, their factory ship, needs to be retired. It's too old and it can't continue to function down in the Southern Ocean. And to replace it's about $500 million. And there's a lot of pressure in Japan to not spend that money on a ship that's not going to make any profit for anybody. So the reason whaling continues by Japan is because Prime Minister Abe comes from a whaling district. The directors on the whaling company owned by the Japanese government are all get six-figure salaries. They'd like to keep those salaries. The union, which supplies the crew for the whaling vessels, is a Yakuza-controlled union, which has a lot of power in Japanese politics. And so what's happened now is there's a lot of resentment in Japan against whaling, and there's a lot of resentment against this move by Japan to bring whaling back to just the coastal area of Japan. But it all comes down to economics. It's just no longer economically viable for Japan to continue its whaling operations. No more pelagic whaling anywhere in the world, and that's wonderful. Now what we have to do? We have to fight Japanese coastal whaling along with fighting Icelandic and Norwegian and Danish coastal whaling, something that we've been doing all along. So we look on this as a very, very positive development. And, people are saying, well, won't this make a dangerous precedent for other countries to go commercial whaling? No, Norway and Iceland have already made that precedent 30 years ago. Other countries are not going to whale. If we go back to the Southern Hemisphere, Peru and Chile, Australia, South Africa, these were all whaling nations. And we fought them, we shut them down. And now these countries, for the most part, especially Australia and Chile, are very much against whaling. And we're hoping that someday Japan will be very much against whaling and that all whaling will be prohibited worldwide. I've spent my entire life opposing whaling, all whaling, by anyone, anywhere, and we will continue to do so into the future. But for now, we're certainly celebrating the fact that the whale wars in the Southern Ocean are over. no more whaling after this season in the Southern Ocean. That means that the Southern Ocean Whale Sanctuary will be 100% protected, and that has been our goal for the last 30 years. And so I think we can take any questions if anybody has any specific questions about all of this to clear up any misunderstandings. Some people are saying Sea Shepherd is supporting commercial whaling. No, we're not. Some people are saying that this is a disaster. No, it's not. And from someone who's been involved in this intimately for decades, I can say that this is an extremely positive development.
Okay, a couple of the questions we have here is, will Sea Shepherd target the new Japanese commercial whaling operation?
Sea Shepherd has always targeted commercial whaling operations by anyone, anywhere. We've been, this last summer, targeting Iceland. We will continue to do so. We've targeted Norway in the past, and we will also target Japanese coastal whaling. The only reason we haven't targeted Japanese whaling in the North Pacific is because all of our resources have been directed to targeting illegal whaling by Japan in the Southern Ocean Whale Sanctuary.
Aren't the Japanese whalers just relocating their whaling operation?
Japan is not relocating its whaling operations. They're retreating from the Southern Ocean, and they're simply continuing to kill whales in an area where they've been killing whales for 30 years, and that is in offshore of their own country in the North Pacific. Nothing's changed there. So we've stopped whaling in the Southern Ocean. Now we have to look at targeting what they're doing in their own waters.
So will we still monitor those waters down in Antarctica?
There's no need for us to monitor those waters. Any movement into those waters, it will be we'll be made aware of it, certainly. Those waters are intensely monitored by governments around the world. We get that information. So there will be no Japanese whaling in the Southern Ocean Whale Sanctuary.
Well, I think we've answered all the questions there. I'll just take some questions from the live feed now.
Mm-hmm.
Will Japan hunt whales on their migration routes on their way to the Southern Ocean Sanctuary?
The whales that are in the Southern Ocean Whale Sanctuary do not come north of the equator, so that won't be happening. Japan will not be targeting any whales that are in the Southern Ocean Whale Sanctuary when they move north towards Australia or the South Pacific Islands.
This is wonderful news. Do we have rights to stop them in their coastal waters?
Stopping them in their coastal waters, of course, is a lot more difficult. But what it does do is, now that they're blatantly commercial whaling, is that we can pressure governments like the United States, the UK, France, other countries which are signatories to the IWC. Because the United Nations Law of the Sea dictates that if anyone does not abide by international conservation law, that is the regulations of the IWC, that these countries have the power to embargo them. And in fact, the United States, specifically under U.S. Department of Commerce regulations, the Packwood-Pelly Amendment, Packwood-Magnuson and the Pelly Amendment, state that Japan, Iceland, and Norway should be embargoed for their fish products and sport fishing gear and a number of articles. The problem has been that the U.S. has refused, since Ronald Reagan, when the moratorium first came in, every president has refused to uphold the U.S. Department of Commerce regulations. So we have to really put a lot of pressure to get them to do that, and also other countries too. This really lies in the hands of Australia, New Zealand, France, the United States to actually do something about it. What we're looking at here is a criminal operation by Norway, by Iceland, and by Japan. And there are laws meant to address that, and we have to pressure the countries to implement those laws. And of course, there's other approaches, whether that be boycotting goods, also taking the fight right into their waters.
Another question that we get often is, will there be another Whale Wars TV show?
There may or may not. That's not up to us. That's up to Discovery and Animal Planet. And we, in fact, are talking to them now about that possibility. But the decision for Whale Wars, the show, is really in the hands of Discovery, not Sea Shepherd.
Is whale meat sold exclusively in Japan, or do they sell it to other nations?
The whale meat from Japan, by Japan, is sold in Japan. Iceland and Norway do sell whale meat to Japan. and of course Iceland and Norway sell whale meat to their own people and to tourists, especially. About 30,000 tourists every year in Iceland buy whale meat in Icelandic restaurants. But Japan still is a major market. But Japan is not the leading number one killer of whales. Norway is. And Iceland is probably the most notorious for actually targeting fin whales. And Japan is probably the third worst whaling nation right now.
What about any update on the Faroese whaling situation?
Well, we're continuing to fight the Faroese whaling. In all this last summer, we've had crews in the Faroe Islands. We'll continue to have crews in the Faroe Islands. We'll do everything we can to continue to publicize what's happening there, to interfere where and when we can. It's a long fight, but eventually I think that we're going to win this. I've dedicated my entire life to ending whaling, and we've seen remarkable victories over the years. Back in 1977, we stopped Australia from killing whales, and now Australia is a major defender of whales. Chile and Peru have all been shut down. We've seen the International Whaling Commission evolve from an industry regulatory body into a conservation body, and that's a very, very positive development.
Do you think Japan will kill more or less whales now?
I think Japan will probably be killing less whales because they won't be killing the whales in the Southern Ocean. They've had a quota of between 200 and 500 whales in the North Pacific for years, and so that will probably remain in effect.
Now that Japan's left the IWC, who do you think will be the dominant country in the IWC now?
Well, the IWC will now be mostly a conservation body. And I think it'll operate quite well with all the member nations as a conservation body. So we're very happy to see that. This last year at the IWC meeting in Brazil, they had what is called the Florianopolis Declaration, and that declaration stated that this body, the IWC, will no longer entertain the idea of legalizing commercial whaling.
Are there any new ships in the fleet?
Well, there has been new ships on and off. We're getting ships on and off. Right now, our vessels are concentrated on saving the Vaquita from extinction in the Sea of Cortez. We have our vessel Farley Mowat there, soon to be joined by our vessel, the White Holly. We are patrolling the newly established marine reserve in Mexico. We're protecting Cocos Island off of Costa Rica. We're documenting and intervening against the Chinese squid fleets about 700, 800 miles west of the Galapagos Islands. We're protecting the Galapagos Marine Reserve. We have boats patrolling both east and west coast of Africa against poachers, making numerous arrests there. We're patrolling against poachers in the Mediterranean. We're protecting dolphins in the Baltic, and we're working to protect the Great Barrier Reef and the Great Australian Bight. We have people on the shores in Nicaragua protecting sea turtles, on the shores of Mayotte Island between Mozambique and Madagascar, protecting sea turtles. So Sea Shepherd as a movement is involved literally in dozens of campaigns around the world.
Is the whale meat industry profitable, and do the Japanese eat it?
The whale meat, the whaling industry has never been profitable. It's hugely subsidized. The Japanese subsidize it to the tune of about $50 million every year. About 1% of the Japanese people do eat it. There's about 6,000 tons of whale meat in refrigerated warehouses in Japan right now. They have a very difficult time selling it. A lot of the vendors in Japan are withdrawing from the market. And there's a growing recognition in Japan that this is an industry that has no future. Certainly if you look at it from a capitalist point of view, it doesn't make any sense because it's not making any money and it survives completely on huge government subsidies. It's a glorified welfare project, and the only people who benefit from it are the directors of the whaling company, the Prime Minister Abe, and the sailors who work on the Yakuza-controlled ships.
Are you still wanted by the Japanese government?
Oh yes, I'm still on the Interpol red list for the crime of conspiracy to trespass on a whaling ship. Now the interesting thing about that is that the red list is for serial killers, war criminals, and major drug traffickers. I'm the only person in history to put on that list for the charge of conspiracy to board a whaling ship. And that shows you just how political it was. And I was on the list for Costa Rica. They were really acting at the request of Japan, but the new government came in and I've now been removed from that list. So it's only on the Japanese list. It's being investigated by a European Parliamentary Committee and by the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, and hopefully it'll soon be removed. The reason I'm on this list is because in 2011, the Shonan Maru #2 cut the Arigil, the vessel that was working with us, cut it in half and destroyed it. And the captain on board that vessel was Pete Bethune, and he boarded the Shonan Maru to confront the captain who just destroyed his ship and was promptly arrested for trespassing. Now, I told him not to board, and I'm on camera telling him not to board. But anyway, he was brought back to Japan in charge of trespassing. Then he made a deal with the prosecution. In return for him saying to them that I ordered him to board the vessel, they gave him a suspended sentence. So that's what he did, and that's why I was charged with conspiracy based solely on his testifying that I ordered him to board the vessel. A couple of years after that, Pete Bethune did sign an affidavit saying that he lied to the Japanese prosecutor. And it was for that reason that I was allowed to come back into the United States, because Secretary of State John Kerry looked at this and said, obviously this is not legitimate. So I was able to come back. But Japan has a lot of power and keeps me on that red list. They were attempting to shut down Sea Shepherd by shutting down me. But what they discovered is that you can shut down an individual, you can shut down an organization, but you can't stop a movement. So Sea Shepherd is now stronger than ever, despite the fact that, I'm still on that list.
Okay, what can people do to help?
Well, Sea Shepherd needs all the support it can get, not just to fight whaling, but also to fight illegal fishing. 40% of all the fish taken out of the ocean is being caught illegally. So our efforts to stop poaching on the high seas has grown considerably. We're now in partnership actually with governments like Liberia, Tanzania, Gabon, Peru, Costa Rica, and Ecuador, and Mexico we're taking their officers, their troops on board to uphold their laws and their waters against poaching operations, in addition to our interventions against poaching on the high seas beyond national jurisdictions.
Okay, I think that's good. We'll end it there, and we'll do another broadcast probably in the next couple of days.
Well, thank you. I just want to add one thing. In Mexican Sea of Cortez this month, we have pulled a record number of nets out of the Vaquita Refuge. I'm quite confident that if it wasn't for Sea Shepherd's Operation Milagro and our incredible volunteers out there who are pulling nets every single day, that the Vaquita would now be extinct. We've pulled in 120,000 meters of illegal nets. We've cost the poachers over $1 million. We've had a couple of drones shot down. We've been shot at, but our campaign is moving along very, very well. And I think we have stopped the diminishment of Vaquita populations, because we're pulling those nets out of the water just as fast as they can set them. And I think that's a very important mission that we're involved in, and one that I'm very confident will be successful.